Well, hi, and welcome back to Roots. This is episode 18, and we're in the second major unit of the series where we're talking about what happens to a person when they come to Christ. We're spending a couple of weeks talking about the doctrine of justification by faith, and I want to explain why we're spending several weeks on this topic. The other week I quoted Martin Luther, who said that the doctrine of justification by faith is the article or doctrine on which the church stands or falls. That is not an overstatement. Justification by faith is the Bible's answer to the question, how can sinful people be made right before a holy God? It is really at the heart of the gospel. One writer I read this week said it's the most important part of what happens to us when we come to Christ. But it's not only at the heart of the gospel, it's where we turn to understand our day-to-day relationship with God. So to say it's foundational is no overstatement at all. Now, this week I want to explain what it means to be justified by faith. So let me give you a definition. Here we go. Justification is the act of God whereby He declares sinful people to be righteous in His sight through faith in the work of Jesus. Let me read that again. Justification is the act of God whereby He declares sinful people to be righteous in His sight through faith in the work of Jesus. Now there's a key word in that definition, and it's the word declare. It means that God makes a statement about us. It has to do with the way God regards us or the way God looks at us. If we can picture a courtroom, it is where God the judge sounds his gavel and pronounces the sentence, not guilty. Now, our Roman Catholic friends believe that God doesn't justify people who aren't already righteous. But the Bible says otherwise. For example, in Romans 4, verse 5, and to the one who does not work, but believes in Him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is counted as righteousness. Romans 4:25 says, speaking about Jesus, that He was delivered up for our trespasses and raised for our justification. I want to tell you a story of something that happened to me that I think goes a long way toward understanding what justification is all about. Several years ago, I got a ticket for going a bit over the 25-mile-an-hour speed limit in a town near mine. And the kick in the head was that I was doing something very spiritual. I was on my way to a Phillies game with my good friend Dale. Now, the officer was waving people off into side streets, and other policemen were coming to write the tickets out. And the guy that came to the car window of my car said, "I'm really sorry to do this," he said, "but my sergeant is intent that we write tickets tonight, and so I have to give you a ticket." I said, "No problem." I was obviously guilty of speeding. Even though everyone else was driving that speed, it didn't matter. I had violated the law. So he issued me the ticket, and on to the ball game we went. And time went by, and I was expecting to hear something about paying the fine and going to court. And finally I did, but it wasn't anything like what I had expected. See, the problem was that I hadn't read the fine print on the back of the ticket. It was blue ink in tiny ink on a yellow, kind of a carbon-stained surface, and you could hardly read it anyway, and I hadn't taken the time to read it. What I was supposed to have done was enter a plea on the ticket and mail it in. So I decided to write a letter. And I said, "I'm really sorry about this. I have not gotten a ticket before, and I didn't realize what I was supposed to do. Here's my ticket. I've filled it out, and I've sent it in. I'm pleading guilty." And soon I got a letter telling me when to appear in court. Well, I arrived at the courthouse, and I was waiting my turn, and I have to admit that I was sweating a bit because I'd never been in that situation before. I mean, obviously, it wasn't, high crime, but I was still a little bit ill at ease, not knowing what kind of fine I was going to get, whether there'd be points taken off. And so I was eventually called in to stand before the judge. And he looked big and imposing behind his very high desk. At a table to my left sat the officer who had set up the speed trap. He wasn't the one who gave me the ticket. He was the one who arranged the whole sting, okay? Well, the judge looked at me and he said, "How do you plead?" And I said, "I plead guilty." And the judge said, "No, you plead not guilty." And I looked at him and I was very confused. And I said, "No, Your Honor, I was speeding and I plead guilty." And finally the judge said, "I see here that you're a minister." And he was holding up my letter. And he said, "And who am I to argue with a man of the cloth? You're not guilty." Bang goes the gavel, out goes me, sort of. See, my letter had been on church stationery. It wasn't intended to influence in any way. I just used church stationery when I wrote letters like that. Now, I walked out of the courtroom and I passed a red-faced, furious officer of the law. But I had no points, no fine, no nothing. Well, actually, I didn't leave quite like that. I walked over to the table where the cop was and I said something about, my father is a retired cop, mumbled a few other things, and he looked at me like he wanted to punch me, so I thought it was a good idea to just leave. Now, I should probably tell you this too, though it has nothing to do with justification by faith. I walked out of the courtroom a free man. I wasn't going to the big house. I wasn't going up the river to the Hoosgow. I walked out of the courthouse a free man. I wasn't going to the big house. I wasn't going to pay any money. And the very first thing that I did was I walked over to a payphone and I dialed the number of my friend Bill, who coincidentally had gotten a ticket for something very similar in the same township and had to pay a $100 fine. And I said, "Hey Bill, guess what? I got off." Ha ha ha. Well, that story has several elements about justification, or several elements that are part of the process of justification. I was guilty, but I had been pardoned by the judge. My guilt had been removed. The cop was, like Satan, steaming mad. But there's one thing that keeps this from being a perfect illustration of justification. And I'm going to talk about that next time.